Right, good morning. Welcome everyone to episode 11 of our What If interview series, where we discuss and share knowledge on customer experience, digital transformation, and how to better serve customers via digital channels. My name is Luke Stamper, and I'm a content marketing executive for Mando. We're a digital agency committed to simplifying digital experiences for everyone. We work within regulated industries with companies like utilities and financial services companies, focusing on helping their customers to do those tasks they don't really want to do. So we don't all wake up on a Saturday morning excited about paying our water bill or submitting an insurance claim. We make those experiences easier, giving customers time back to do things that are more exciting. Just to let you all know that my colleague Sarah Davies is also on the call with us. Sarah will be helping with logistics and monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions or comments throughout, please be sure to send them in, and Sarah will ask them at the end of the discussion. We'll be chatting for around 20 minutes, and then we'll move on to some questions from the audience. So today we're discussing what if designing inclusive digital experiences was more than just a box ticking exercise, with my colleague and Mando's head of Frontend, Andy Pimlett. For those of you who haven't met Andy before, Andy's been working for Mando for around 3 years, and he's passionate about cultivating a new philosophy around inclusive product design, which embeds front-end development into experience design. Andy has a wealth of experience in working directly with strategy, user experience, business analysis, and ultimately the entire discovery and design process. So good morning, Andy. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
How are you doing?
Sorry?
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Very good. As Luke said, I'm Andy Pimlett, head of Frontend at Mando. I've been designing and building websites for some 20 years, which when I say out loud sounds quite strange, because in many ways the web still seems very new a lot of the time. It's something which is ever present in our lives, and we use on a daily basis, but there is always that kind of newness to it, which I think comes with technology in general. Way back when I started, it was very much in the domain of enthusiasts and hobbyists, and that's where my interest in it kind of started, and my passion for it started, and it's kind of stayed with ever since. And even today, I find there's still that real sense of excitement and buzz in taking a piece of design and a piece of code that you've got on your local computer, your local machine, and then having that published and presented to the rest of the world, and to certainly work on some of the types of projects and for the types of clients that I do at Mando, to know that I could be sat on a train, I could be sat in an airport, I could be sat in a restaurant, and someone could be using a mobile device to pay a bill, check an account, or communicate directly with a kind of customer service representative. To know that me and my team have been involved in enabling that is really rewarding. So yeah, in terms of what I do at Mando, as Luke says, I've been at Mando for around 3 years. For the last couple of years, I've been the head of Frontend. So what is Frontend at Mando? A little bit different at Mando by comparison to maybe other digital agencies. Historically, it's very much a kind of coding-based discipline, and responsible for the production of the visual aspects of a website. So the user interface, what you see in the browser, is delivered by the front-end team. And what we've done at Mando is we've shifted, adjusted the structure of the team slightly, so that the front-end team includes front-end developers as well as designers. So it's not purely a tech or an engineering discipline, it's more of an integrated and holistic discipline, and it sits within our experience design department. And there are a number of reasons why we did that, but actually one of the key drivers was being the recognition of a more multidisciplinary approach is better for inclusivity and accessibility, because it has us thinking about these problems much earlier than would be the case if it was just purely an engineering pursuit. So that's me, that's what I do at Mando.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Andy, for a little bit of background there. It's really interesting indeed. What I'd really like to discuss today is whether companies from a whole range of different sectors are simply ticking a box that they need to in order to be, let's say, for example, WCAG compliant, or whether it's a holistic approach to make their digital channels inclusive for their entire customer base. What are your thoughts on this, and how would you differentiate between, as I said before, ticking boxes to be WCAG compliant or having that holistic approach, and what are the knock-on effects for customers for both approaches?
Yeah. Firstly, it's worth saying that it's a real challenge for organizations and embracing a lot of these things. And so kudos to anyone who is being intentional and aiming to solve these problems for their customers. I think when it comes to the concept of or the idea of box ticking, there have historically been a couple of schools of thought, and unfortunately there is things are changing. There is an improvement in mindset and approach, and organizations are being more intentional. But I think what we've seen historically is accessibility has been a case of what is the lowest possible threshold that I can meet to not end up in a situation where I might be breaking the law if there's particular laws in place, or to avoid any negative publicity for the brand. In other ways, it's purely about mitigating cost and punitive action than it is about solving problems for users. And so in terms of the box ticking, I think that's what we want to try and move away from, is that sort of mindset. And there's plenty of reasons why we would do that. In terms of what the difference is between inclusivity and accessibility per se, because what we need to be careful is we don't, anyone who's attempting to solve problems for users and improve an accessibility of a website, I wouldn't necessarily argue that is purely box ticking if their intention is focused on the users. In terms of the difference between the two, it's helpful to kind of define them. Accessibility is essentially anything you do to your website or your digital experience which is designed to accommodate users with disabilities, or to allow users with disabilities to be able to use a particular experience or proceed through a customer journey unhindered. And largely that entire approach, that entire area is supported by the criterion as laid down in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are now in version 2.1. And they are structured in such a way that there's a whole bunch of criteria to satisfy users with disabilities. Inclusivity is more of a philosophy. It's a kind of overarching approach whereby you are not necessarily seeking to solely focus on the needs of disabled users. Your intention is to solve the problems of users, the broadest possible segment of all of your customers. So in other words, you're trying to solve as many of the problems as you can and essentially break down barriers so that if somebody wants to digitally self-serve, then they can, regardless. And it's a mindset and a philosophical approach that's slightly different, because it moves way back from just an engineering consideration right back to discovery and identification of personas around who your customers are, what their needs are, what the makeup of the kind of demographics are in terms of those personas, and really starting to understand that and the journeys that they will undertake and what the outcomes of those journeys are. And then from that, you can begin to design things which solve those problems directly.
Great. So can you give me any examples of where companies have taken that very holistic approach and are sort of leading the way for digital accessibility, inclusivity?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious candidates in terms of very deeply entrenched inclusivity and leveraging a great deal of resource in that sort of space are the big techs. So Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Instagram, they're leveraging quite a bit of resource. Microsoft in particular have invested a great deal, and their resources alone in terms of inclusivity and an inclusive approach are really impressive. If you Google Microsoft inclusivity, whole section of their website, loads of resources to help organizations on that journey and understand what they need to do. In terms of the work that we've done at Mando, we've worked closely with a number of our clients, such as United Utilities, Electricity Northwest, USS, to drive up accessibility standards. So I'm obviously proud of those from myself and my team's perspective. In terms of gold standards and where to look, then in a way one need look no further than the work of GDS on Gov UK. It stands as a pinnacle of accessible and inclusive digital service. I guess the one thing I find there's one sort of thread that I often hear when I'm in conversation with people and I do talk about GDS and Gov UK is people can often say, well, it looks a bit bland, and it's, you know, it might be great for information and serving the public at large, but it's not particularly exciting. It's not particularly branded in that sense, and I can understand that and sympathise with that view. And so I guess if from a branded perspective, I really quite like British Gas's approach to the way they've built out their site. It's very accessible, scores very highly on accessibility testing, but looks very nice. Obviously an example of a enterprise grade content managed platform. So it's going to be serviced by content editors, client side and so on. So, you know, kudos for that, for a product of that scale to work the way it does.
Great. So why would you say that creating this holistic approach to creating inclusive digital experiences is so important? And for anyone listening who is at the start of that journey, I'm keen to understand, you know, if they're aiming to create inclusive digital experiences for their customers, what are the first few steps in the process, and what do they really need to be considering first?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing to say is it does very much depend on whether you're approaching the work from the perspective of improving an existing estate or you're starting from scratch. The reason being, I tend to use an analogy around the physical world where you might have a building, and if you have a building that was built 15 years ago and your intention is to improve its support of disabled users, then there's various things you can do. You can put in ramps, you can put in lifts, you can put in hearing loops, you can put in lots of fixtures and fittings which will improve the access to that building. If you sort of compare that with the idea that you have a blank piece of paper and you have an architect and you have a focus group of people made up of all different walks of life and different backgrounds feeding into the design of a new building, then you have a very different thing, because baked into the fabric and the DNA of that building are all of the things that you need: the layout and the structure of rooms and the positioning of rooms and the length of corridors and staircases and stairwells and the width and so on. And so there's many more features that you can build into design when you're starting from scratch. So it is quite important to remember that where you're starting on your digital journey is impacted as to whether you're fixing or improving an existing estate or you're starting from scratch. To come back to the question specifically as kind of, you know, why it's important to holistic approach is Microsoft defines the idea of you solve for one and you extend to many. And it strikes to the heart of user-focused design in that if you get designers to focus on the user's needs, and provided the users are clearly defined and you have an understanding of who your customers are, then when designers are focused on designing around those needs, then the solutions will naturally present themselves and then consequently be engineered. Whereas if you come to a product that is already built and try and retrofit accommodations in, you're making some progress and some improvements, but you're not necessarily baking it into the DNA. So the takeaway I'd say is, if you're starting from scratch, if you've got a blank piece of paper, or you're within the next 2 to 5 years, you're embarking on a major replatform or a major new site build, don't let accessibility be a single line item in your RFP saying a website needs to be WCAG compliant, because you've got to remember WCAG was drafted in 2008. The 2.0 specification was drafted in 2008. Responsive design didn't really exist. Apple released, I think, the first iPhone in the same year. And so much of the original document was focused around the needs of vision impaired users on desktop devices. And the reality is disabilities and impairments and the types of people you're going to be serving is way beyond vision impairment. So if you're starting from scratch tomorrow, don't just look at WCAG. Approach it from the very beginning. Get your designers focused on the problems of your users and move it forward from that point.
Okay, great. So Are technologies like ReciteMe and Accessibe a good place to start, or is that further down the line?
Well, I guess, I mean, for the benefit of those listening in, just to quickly talk about those technologies, we're talking about sort of third-party technologies which can be integrated into a website, which provide an array of tools to improve journeys and usage of that site by someone who might be disabled. I think what's important is anything which improves the customer journey, anything which optimizes usage for someone who is disabled is a good thing. So I would never criticize something which is capable of delivering benefit to a user. I think what I would say is there's 2 points. One, if you integrate a new piece of kit into a website, you've whether your intention is to improve things, you've inadvertently created a barrier, and there is a learning curve. So a user arrives at the website, they've got to learn this tool to then get the benefit of it. The second point is that, and this is the more important point, is I have no problem with tools being deployed to improve the usage of a site and optimize the site for disabled users. But what I do take issue with is when something like that is used to shore up and paper over the cracks of something which is just poorly built. The reality is modern web browsers, modern mobile devices, with the accessibility features that are baked into the hardware and the operating system and the browser, when matched with well-designed, well-engineered, WCAG compliant code, are going to deliver a really good, rich experience for the users that you want to reach. And let's not forget that those users, they are the best judge of what works for them. They will already have tools in place. They will have things like screen readers. They will have assistive technologies that they use every single day. And provided it's a level playing field, provided they are getting what those technologies need as a baseline to work in an optimum way, then everything will be fine. So my position is that if you do everything right and you approach everything properly, then you probably don't need additional technologies to dial up the optimization.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you very much. So we've established the importance of a holistic approach into creating accessible solutions for your customers. It's obviously an almost paramount importance, if not paramount importance. But how does a company operating within the utilities, energy, or financial services sector benefit from adopting that holistical approach? And how do they benefit from what we've previously been discussing up to now?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, heavily regulated, large, almost public sector organizations, they are serving such an enormous customer base that spans the entire range of society. They need to effectively meet the needs of everybody. And the reality is, and particularly now, I mean, the last few months with the pandemic and the world we're now navigating, it's the case that clearly digital has a massive role to play in allowing people to function and continue with their lives. If there was a situation where your electricity supply or your water supply quality was somehow dependent on your mental health or your ability to do something, that would be obviously and rightly regarded as, nobody would stand for that. If a depressed person received substandard water, that would simply not be allowed. And so my contention is well, if that's the case for the actual service, it should be the case for the ability to digitally self-serve as well. And so the importance is massive. Even ignoring legislation or potential for negative brand publicity, building inclusive experiences makes good business sense. Ultimately, you will capture more users, you will capture and satisfy the needs of more customers, and obviously throughout that process, generate greater brand advocacy, and win-win.
Yeah. Do you reckon it could drive further innovation adopting that approach?
100%. Yeah, I mean, necessity is the mother of invention, and user-focused design is the bedrock of that innovation. So as traditionally as a front-end developer, as a guy who writes code based on a design that has been produced and it comes down a pipeline of production, this is not how we approach the work now at Mando, but it's a historical approach to this type of work, is that it's almost like a production line. And so when the idea that design would flow down a production line, and essentially the front-end developer would build it and add in WCAG compliance as they sort of fit, as entirely as an engineering consideration and not as a kind of design consideration, misses a huge opportunity, massive opportunity. Mm-hmm. By having designers and practitioners focus in on the problems and solve them together in an integrated fashion, you're going to have more innovation. It is a natural byproduct, and so the quality of the output, the final output, will just be better.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm keen to move on and briefly highlight a new product of ours, which is the accessibility audit. Andy, I know you've been involved in the creation of this product. Can you tell me a little bit about what it entails for our customers?
Yeah, sure. So WCAG doesn't read particularly well. It's written by engineers for engineers. It's really great for me to read how a form should be marked up or how an image should be handled to maximize accessibility, but it doesn't really tell a customer or a marketing team or an organization grappling with what they need to focus on. It doesn't really give a huge amount of insight. And as I've said before, its focus is around satisfying the needs of disabled users. It's not necessarily an inclusive approach to the way things are done. What we've recognized is it's incredibly challenging for organizations to know where to start. And that is a given. And accessibility, inclusivity is not the only component of a new digital product. There are lots and lots of things. There's hosting, there's performance, there's security, there's the customer experience, and a whole host of things that go into the development. So this is just one. It's important that organizations have a partner and a guide who can go on that journey with them and feed in the expertise and the knowledge. And the accessibility audit for us is a kind of catalyst product for that. It allows us to leverage all of our expertise in the type of space that we operate well in. So dealing with regulated industries, our utility clients, we have a huge amount of knowledge and insight into what the key user journeys are, what the primary user journeys are. So we've kind of been through this a number of times, and what we can do when we audit against those key journeys is we can feed back really useful insight. We can contextualize where and why the problems might exist and what the solutions might look like to fix those things in a way that a standard accessibility audit won't necessarily deliver.
Okay.
So yeah, that's it.
So can we start that audit somewhere along the journey of an accessibility strategy, for want of a better way of putting it, or does it have to always be at the beginning of the process?
No, I mean, from our perspective, it makes no difference. We've got significant experience in dealing, consulting and guiding clients at vastly different levels of maturity on this particular scale. And also we work on greenfield projects where we're starting from scratch, and we work on managed services managed services where we're onboarding existing estates and then supporting those estates and going through enhancement projects to improve and extend features. So in that sense, Mando are completely flexible, and this particular product can be applied regardless of the client's maturity and regardless of the age of an estate. And that's the beauty of it, really. It's flexible, and it will deliver a set of actionable backlog items along the spectrum from a kind of low-hanging fruit at the left-hand side to the more advanced enhancement projects as you move up the scale.
Great. Okay, so before we move on to some questions from today's audience, I just wanted to ask one last thing. Whilst we keep our webinars conversation-led, exploring the key issues, we like to focus on the practical suggestions that people that are listening today can take away. With that in mind, what would you say are your top 3 tips people looking to implement a strategy of this kind that we've been discussing?
Yeah, Good question. I think for me, a takeaway is if I kind of split it into two, again, from a kind of accessibility inclusivity perspective, if the goal is to drive up the accessibility standard for maybe an existing solution, then for me, it's pretty clear what you want is you want really good keyboard navigation. You want a website to be entirely keyboard navigable without the use of a mouse. And that makes a huge difference to somebody who can't use a mouse because they can't lift the mouse, use the mouse physically, or because they can't see the mouse pointer or accurately control the mouse pointer. So keyboard navigation is a huge one, and lots of websites are not navigable by keyboard. So that can be a quick win. Second one is to ensure good semantic structure and labeling, particularly of forms, and making sure all of those things are effectively constructed in the markup that sits behind them. Now that's an engineering consideration, but what that allows for is assistive technologies like screen readers to really function well and in an optimized way. So that would be my second. The third one, I think, would be around color, and just to say, there's a huge number of users who are colorblind, lots of different types of color blindness. Many users are colorblind, and as well as that, just general vision impairment. So I'd say as part of your approach, make sure your color contrasts are good, so that you've got a solid contrast between background colors and foreground text, and also to maybe not use color as the primary mode of signaling a particular user interface item, because some users won't necessarily tell the difference between, for example, green and red. So if you just use green and red to signal something, then those users aren't going to understand that. The contrast one is an important one, because actually it's a trigger point by which a user could fall from being able to meaningfully read through a website versus having to then fall back on a screen reader and assistive technology. And for the sake of ensuring the contrasts are good and the fonts are good and the sizes are good, the user wouldn't have to do that. Yeah. And that is not a big ask at all. So those three would be my three. The other side, from an inclusivity perspective, I would say listen to your users, listen to your analytics data. If you can't listen to your analytics data, have your digital partner, have their strategy and insights team help you to decipher that data and play it back in a meaningful way. And ultimately choose a partner who knows this stuff and can really go with you on that journey and get the results that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you, Andy. Questions from the audience? Sarah?
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Luke and Andy. I think it was a great conversation, and I think it's definitely got people thinking about what's actually going on in their digital estates. So we've got actually a comment from one of our clients at the moment. United Utilities have been a client with us for over 12 years, and we've worked on their digital journey. And Amanda Phillips says the use of Recite Me also helps our customer-facing staff communicate with our customers when out and about, especially when English is not their first language. So I think it's really important to highlight that you need these tools obviously work in different ways for different people in different organizations. And the first question from the audience is about COVID. We all know we've gone through a lot of changes and the way we work is very different now. But what would you say COVID has done for inclusive design? Has it changed the way we look at it now?
That's a really good question. I think for me, one of the things that I think is evident is it's really sharpened the lens, because more than ever, it's made people realize that perhaps before certain digital journeys, digital touch points were a kind of nice to have or an alternative. They're very quickly becoming the kind of the priority channel, and the one that is going to be able to service users in the most optimum way, the quickest, when we are living in periods of either lockdown or different levels of restriction. And so, yeah, I think, and I hope as well, I mean, if anything positive is to come out of the pandemic, there is absolutely nothing wrong at all with the idea that organizations suddenly have the desire to focus their intention on inclusivity and accessibility, because that's going to lead to positive results for everyone, whether it's a pandemic or it's not.
Definitely. I think back over to you, Luke.
Okay, so I think that's everything really. Thank you very much, Andy, and thank you for those of you that have joined this morning. If any questions arise afterwards, then please feel free to ping them towards us, and we'll get back to you. But at that, I think I'll leave you to the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
One thing we just wanted to highlight as well, on the 3rd of November is Purple Tuesday with Microsoft, and it's a really important event that obviously focuses on the importance of accessibility and inclusivity. So if you guys aren't signed up already, it would be really good for you to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah.
No worries. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye.